Good afternoon. This is your captain speaking with just a little flight information. We're flying at an altitude of 37,000 feet and our airspeed is 400 miles an hour. A couple little facts here. I'm packing a Colt King Cobra. That's a .357 caliber firearm with a black rubber grip and a 6-inch barrel, capable of piercing body armor at a distance of up to 27 feet. And it can put a hole in human bone and flesh the size of the Grand Canyon, which, by the way, is coming up on the left-hand side of the plane. So just sit back and relax and enjoy the rest of the flight.
No, not you. Not you. Your organization's terrible. Should I tell you? Should I tell you? Oh, you're Boy Scout, but you know life. You know life. You know I'm totally off script right now.
Hello, this is News Dive, and I'm your host, Shane. It is Wednesday, July 26th, 2023, and let's dive into the headlines. The system of Atlantic Ocean currents that drive warm water from the tropics towards Europe is at risk of collapsing in the coming decades, an analysis of 150 years of temperature data published Tuesday concluded. A buoy positioned roughly 40 miles south of Miami recorded a sea surface temperature of 101.1 degrees Fahrenheit earlier this week, stunning scientists who say the reading could mark the latest in the string of global records as fossil fuel-driven extreme weather around the world brings unprecedented heat. The US and its allies are worried that Ukraine's stalled counter-offensive means the war between Russian and Ukrainian forces will be an open-ended conflict, the Wall Street Journal reported Tuesday. While the Biden administration has expressed concern about the judicial overhaul being pushed by the Israeli government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it has made clear US military aid to Israel will not be affected. A petitioner in the recent U.S. Supreme Court case that overturned anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people in Colorado appears to have misled the court regarding key facts in the case. Lori Smith, who owns the website production company 303 Creative, was represented in the case by a far-right legal organization, Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF. In their filing to the court, Smith and ADF claimed that a Colorado law barring businesses from discriminating against LGBTQ residents has rendered her unable to perform certain functions within her business, particularly creating wedding websites, as she didn't want to make websites for same-sex couples. But reporting from the New Republic shows that Smith did create a wedding website at least in one instance. This isn't the first time Smith and ADF have been caught lying in their complaint to the court. Prior to the Supreme Court's ruling in late June, the New Republic discovered that Smith had used the name of a man in her legal filing, alleging that he and his partner had requested a wedding website, purportedly showcasing the real possibility that, had she offered wedding websites, same-sex couples would have requested her services. In fact, Smith and ADF appear to have made the whole thing up. The man, who went by the street name Stewart in the filing, does exist, but he has been married to a woman for several years, and is himself a website creator, a point that makes his supposed request for a website dubious at best. In spite of the false claims made in the case, the conservative majority in the Supreme Court sided with Smith, ruling that the Colorado anti-discrimination law was too burdensome for businesses and violated their speech rights. Algeria, Croatia, France, Greece, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Tunisia, and Turkey. What do these 9 countries have in common? All of them are currently battling deadly infernos made worse by the fossil fuel-driven climate emergency. And yet, governments worldwide continue to greenlight new coal, oil, and gas production, exacerbating planet heating pollution and ensuring that heat waves, wildfires, and other extreme weather disasters will increase in frequency, duration, and intensity. Over 40 international and local civil society groups on Wednesday called for accountability for all perpetrators of war crimes during the nearly 9-year civil war and US-backed Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, as well as reconciliation, redress, and reparations for victims of the conflict that claimed nearly 400,000 lives and upended millions more. The pro-abortion rights movement in Ohio has gathered enough momentum to place a referendum on the ballot this coming November, which could codify the right to abortion care in the state constitution. Immigrant rights advocates on Tuesday applauded a ruling handed down by a U.S. district judge blocking the Biden administration's anti-asylum rule, which places restrictions on migrants who aim to exercise their internationally recognized right to seek asylum at the southern U.S. border. And that will conclude today's headlines. As scientists warn of a mass extinction and ecological tipping points, congressional Republicans are helping their fossil fuel industry donors by quietly inserting provisions into annual spending bills designed to bar the American government from combating and researching climate change, according to the fine print of legislative text reviewed by the lever. Some provisions also require the leasing of federal lands and water for oil and gas development, while potentially limiting such leases for wind power. In all, Republican leaders have added at least a dozen such environmental provisions to 4 annual government spending bills as property damage and death tolls mount from historic heat waves, floods, and wildfires. By adding the provisions to annual must-pass spending bills, Republicans who control the U.S. House are attempting to force Senate Democrats to choose between either accepting them or blocking the spending bills and shutting down the government. For his part, President Joe Biden has declined to issue a climate emergency declaration, which could provide his administration new authority to circumvent at least some of the Republicans' tactics. The GOP bills are currently in the House Appropriations Committee, chaired by Texas Republican Representative Kay Granger, who has received nearly $1.2 million from the oil and gas sector over the course of her career in Congress. Her second largest career campaign contributor is the oil and gas industry, and she brags on her government website that she has fought to prevent spending to combat climate change. Granger's congressional district has been grappling with a heat-related public health crisis. One of the most aggressive Republican climate provisions moving through Granger's panel is buried in legislation funding the government's science agencies, as waters around South Florida set records for the hottest ocean temperatures ever recorded. A line in the bill would bar the Biden administration from spending any money on climate change fisheries research. The move comes just weeks after tens of thousands of dead fish washed ashore in Texas due to high temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico, following other recent mass die-offs in Australia. The Center for Biological Diversity notes that intensifying ocean acidification triggered by climate change could disrupt the entire marine ecosystem. The subcommittee that originally authored the fisheries legislation is headed by Republican Representative Hal Rogers, who hails from the coal-rich state of Kentucky and whose top career campaign contributors include donors from the mining and fossil fuel industries. Rogers has raised more than $500,000 from the mining industry over the course of his career, and $390,000 from the oil and gas industry, according to data from Open Secrets. In the 2019-2020 cycle, Rogers' campaign paid $66,000 to his wife Cynthia. The science funding bill also zeroes out funding for the U.S. Global Change Research Program at the National Science Foundation, which coordinates research across the federal government to understand the human-caused and natural processes that influence our planet, and would additionally block the government from using any funds to carry out climate-related Biden executive orders. The bill targets a Biden order issued in January 2021 that directed the federal government to use the procurement process in which it acquires goods and services from the private sector to mitigate carbon emissions as part of a broader federal effort to address climate change. The order also specifically directed the Commerce Department to collect input from fishermen, regional ocean councils, fishery management councils, scientists, and other stakeholders on how to make fisheries and protected resources more resilient to climate change, including changes in management and conservation measures, and improvement in science, monitoring, and cooperative research. The GOP legislation also moves to fund a separate Biden order from April 2022 that sought to enhance the federal government's forest stewardship and promote climate-smart stewardship of mature and old-growth trees. The Republican spending bills contain several more efforts to undermine the Biden administration's ability to meaningfully respond to the worsening global climate crisis. That includes the bill authorizing funding for the Department of Interior, which oversees public lands. The legislation contains a provision mandating none of the funds made available by this act may be used to consider or incorporate the social cost of carbon. The bill also permanently rescinds $1.3 billion in grant funding under the Clean Air Act to mitigate the effects of air pollution, as more than a quarter of all Americans now live in areas with dangerous levels of such pollution. The Interior Spending Bill also includes provisions requiring the Secretary of the Interior to conduct quarterly onshore oil and gas lease sales, as well as fossil fuel lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico, according to the bill report. At the same time, the legislation bars the government from issuing leases for offshore wind development in Florida until the completion of a study about windmills' impact on military readiness and training, marine environment and ecology, tourism, and other uses of the outer continental shelf. The latter rider is in response to Florida Republican lawmakers' complaint that people travel from around the world to see our pristine beaches, not windmills. The Department of Interior funding bill has been spearheaded by Representative Mike Simpson, Republican from Idaho, who has received nearly $900,000 in campaign contributions from electric utility interests during the course of his career, as well as roughly $440,000 from oil and gas industry donors. In the last few years, climate-intensified wildfires have caused billions of damage in Simpson State. Then there's the bill funding the Department of State and Foreign Aid. That legislation would bar funding for the Green Climate Fund, one of the entities charged with fulfilling the mandates of the Paris Climate Accords, which received a $1 billion deposit from the Biden administration in April. Likewise, the bill prohibits the federal government from financing the Clean Technology Fund, which helps developing countries transition away from dirtier energy sources, and also explicitly rejects the concept of climate reparations, decreeing that none of the funds may be used to pay compensation to any country, organization, or individual for losses and damages attributed to climate change. The bill also prevents the funding of an August 2021 Department of the Treasury guidance calling on multilateral development banks like the International Monetary Fund and World Bank to limit financing of fossil fuel projects. The State Department and Foreign Aid bill is being overseen by Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, Republican from Florida, who has received nearly $430,000 in campaign contributions from the energy and natural resources industry during his time in office. His district includes locales that a recent climate study said are among the most likely to be soon underwater due to rising ocean levels. The House bill for funding the Security and Exchange Commission, meanwhile, seeks to bar the agency's proposed climate disclosure rule, which would mandate that publicly traded companies provide a full disclosure of their climate risks. The subcommittee overseeing the SEC bill is headed by Representative Steve Womack, Republican from Arkansas, who has received more than $175,000 from oil and gas interests during his career. Womack's home state has recently experienced deadly tornadoes and flash flood warnings. Finally, the GOP bill funding the Department of Labor will maintain a ban from 1976 that has been reapproved annually under both Republican and Democratic control of Congress that bars the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, from investigating deaths at farms that employ less than 10 people, including deaths related to extreme heat. Due to mass automation in the agricultural industry, this exemption includes many farms that are quite large and profitable. While OSHA has yet to issue a standard governing excess heat in the workplace, the agency is tasked with investigating death or injuries in cases of extreme heat. At least 436 people died from extreme heat on the job from 2011 to 2021, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The OSHA bill originated in a subcommittee headed by Representative Robert Aderholt, Republican from Alabama, whose top career campaign contributors include donors from agribusiness and the fossil fuel industry. Nearly a quarter of the Alabama labor force is outdoor workers, and the state recently experienced temperatures above 100 degrees. The bills will now move to the full House for approval, and then the final bills must be negotiated with the Senate and passed again through both houses of Congress. If the provisions are kept in the text and Biden vetoes the spending bills, parts of the federal government could shut down. And that will conclude today's episode. Please like and follow the show wherever you follow podcasts. Leave 5 stars, a good review, and share the episode around. Follow the show on social media, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.